Well, welcome everyone to this very exciting panel to kick off a very full day here at the Zero Carbon Future Pavilion. We're really excited to have you all. We're going to be talking first this morning about California's leadership in the clean energy transition. So we've got some very exciting guests here today. I'm going to give some brief introductions, and then we've got a short video here. So here to my left, we have Senator Bob Weickowski, who represents the 10th Senate District in the California State Legislature. That's, if I'm correct, southern Alameda County, right? All the way into parts of Santa Clara County. And his district is home to some of the state's leading clean tech companies. Very exciting. And he's also a leader on budget and financial issues in the legislature. So welcome. Our second speaker, again, here first, immediate to my right, is Senator John Laird. Welcome, Senator. He represents the 17th District in California. Hello, yep, great. Before he joined the Senate, he was Secretary of California's Natural Resources Agency under Governor Jerry Brown. So he has a long history of leadership on these issues. Thank you for being here. Our third speaker today is Senator Dave, who represents the 37th, which is the cities of Anaheim Hills, Costa Mesa, Huntington Beach, Irving, and others. Dave's a native Californian and is one of the country's leading experts on banking and housing policy. We're really excited to have him here with us today. We're going to be joined by a fourth speaker shortly, but before he joins us, we're going to have a short video. Recently, Clean Air Task Force and the Environmental Defense Fund out in California released a report called Growing the Grid. So we're going to hear about that first from some of our experts.
I'm Alex Breckel, Director of Clean Energy Infrastructure at Clean Air Task Force. California is a leader in climate and clean energy policy, setting the standard high with its ambitious goals, including 100% zero carbon electricity sales and economy-wide net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. And while these targets are more than 20 years away, California must take urgent action to meet important milestones that are right around the corner. In a new report, Clean Air Task Force and Environmental Defense Fund identified some of the challenges California faces to scaling clean energy and provides recommendations to accelerate the state's clean energy transition. So what are the challenges, and how can California increase the odds of achieving its climate goals? According to projections by the California Air Resources Board, the state's electricity generation capacity needs to be nearly 4 times larger than it is today. They also estimate that 5 gigawatts of utility-scale solar needs to be built every year for each of the next 20 years, and that's 5 times faster than today's rate. To integrate this much clean energy, the capacity of the transmission system, those large power lines that move electricity to consumers, would need to triple.
I'm Michael Colvin, Director of the California Energy Program at Environmental Defense Fund. This may sound daunting, but California has a consistent track record of doing big things. We do not shy away from a challenge just because it's hard. In my mind, this is not a question of if we can do it, but when and how. And it is in that spirit that I firmly believe the state can affordably and reliably decarbonize our electric grid and use that clean grid to decarbonize other major parts of our economy. To pull this off, policymakers will need to keep a few important things in mind. First, clean energy resources will use a lot of land, and we need to optimize around the sites that have the best fit for the surface area available. Second, a diverse energy resource portfolio both makes the grid more reliable and more affordable. So as we add on a massive amount of wind and solar, we need to look to other clean firm power technologies. Third, we cannot just continue to plan for the sake of planning. We need to build and build now. It takes more than a decade to build transmission in California, which means we need to leverage this development cycle as much as possible. Fourth, we need local community engagement. The energy infrastructure we build today will be around for the rest of our lifetime, and the community should be directly engaged. This energy transition needs to be for everyone, and we need to start with communities currently on the front line who are facing polluting sources of energy today.
California's clean energy leadership is commendable and positions the state to go even further, turning its ambition into action. Our report offers several specific recommendations to set the state up for success in the years ahead. First and most importantly, California needs a comprehensive clean energy deployment plan that engages local governments and communities to identify specific amounts, locations, and timing of new resource development and infrastructure expansion across the state. California should also assign a lead agency with the responsibility to implement the plan and develop a dashboard to publicly track progress and enhance accountability. Finally, California policymakers should continuously identify and advance supportive policies for planning, permitting, financing, and building clean energy infrastructure in the state.
Everything we've talked about today is doable and achievable. We present these findings and recommendations to help ensure that all energy customers in the state can benefit from the clean energy transition. After all, there's no point in doing this work unless the grid we are left with is affordable, clean, safe, and accessible. Because remember, this is no longer a question of if we can do this, but when and how. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello? Great. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to really briefly introduce, we have a fourth speaker who's going to be joining us, but I want to get into our discussion. But Commissioner Rechtenschaffen from the California Public Utilities Commission will also be joining us in a few minutes. Before he joined the CPUC, he was a senior advisor to Governor Brown for 6 years, where he worked on climate, energy, and environmental issues. So he'll be joining our discussion shortly. Again, I'm Lindsey Baxter Griffith. I work on U.S. advocacy at the Clean Air Task Force. So I want to get our discussion underway. Let's start with, really at the beginning, or the roots of this, which we're talking about a clean energy transition in California because California has really taken on this challenge of decarbonization in an ambitious way. So I want to dig into the specifics, but first let's start. Can you, each of you, tell us about California's ambition on climate? So what does it mean when we call California a leader on climate and clean energy issues? I'll start with you, Senator Laird.
Thank you very much. And I happened to have been in the legislature in 2006 when we passed the first major bill, Assembly Bill 32. And what it really was is that the Kyoto Accords had said by 2020 we need to have the emissions of 1990 and cut to get there. And when the United States government was walking away from that, California imposed that on itself. And when that happened, and it's interesting because it just came up in the debates that we had this year, it set the goal and it gave the Air Board the ability to raise the money and the authority to take actions, but it didn't specify what the actions were. And it was interesting because people argued this is just a goal, and yet we met it. If we had put every specific action in a bill, we probably couldn't have passed the bill. But instead, by doing the goals and the authorities and the money, we got there. And we have been adding to it ever since. Commissioner Rechtenschaffen and I both worked for the Brown administration, and in 2011 did the same thing, 33% in our renewable in our electricity portfolio by 2020, and we met that early. And so it has been leadership over time on exactly those things, and then you put the specific actions and additional goals underneath that, and California's just been out there ahead of the other states.
Thank you. So I was just elected to the Senate in 2020, and as Lindsey mentioned before, I was a banking law professor. I had no background in climate, but it's obviously the most important issue of our lifetimes, and I come at this with a relatively new perspective. I look at the leadership of some of my colleagues, Senator Laird, Senator Weickowski, and for me, I think what we're doing right is we're continuing to push the envelope. This last legislative year was obviously a banner year for us, codifying the governor's executive order into law, 2045 zero emissions, some aggressive interim targets on clean electricity, the setbacks on new drilling permits, 3,200 feet from any schools, residences, churches, and the like. So I think that's what we're doing right. I think we have to continue pushing. We've met the past goals. Those are, I think, the lower hanging fruit. And I think we do face challenges. So even as we celebrate some of our big wins,
Gracias, José Miguel. Tomamos tu
I look at
propuesta
this
de avanzar con
and
el
see
manual.
that we've got
Quisiera entonces ir con una segunda ronda de preguntas para cada uno y preguntarle a Gilén qué podemos aprender del
No worries.
papel de las métricas
We've got
en la
some
aceleración del financiamiento
we've got a number of our
climático
colleagues that
que
are
podría usarse a medida que,
I think,
digamos,
very,
embarcamos en este establecimiento de
maybe
la manera
scared
en
or
cómo
intimidated
medimos
by the oil
la-
industry, and that's a real challenge for us. That even in a supermajority of Democrats, there are challenges to getting aggressive climate policy passed. I think one of the things California, in my mind, is doing better than a lot of countries is around environmental justice, and the setbacks bill is an example of that. It's something we talk about all the time here in the district, and so I think that for me, again, being a new entrant to the legislature is something important to see. And so even though I represent an area that's we are clean energy adopters. We actually, I think, have the most zero emissions vehicles sold in Orange County, particularly the areas I represent, like Newport Beach, Irvine. We have the highest numbers of electric vehicles sold, of hydrogen vehicles sold. But at the same time, that's not going to be enough. We know we have a lot more to do. But I'm going to give it up to Senator Weickowski because I think he has feelings here.
Well, John's absolutely right, and so is David, about having these goals that create incentives. We've got the former Air Board chair that's with us in the audience, and when we gave the Air Board authority to set regulations and set policy, we see that the sale of automobiles in California. California has a big problem with emissions from the cars, and now we're going to set policy that will tell the dealers that they can't sell these fossil fuel-based emissions. But the other side is that you got to have a complementary budget. It's one thing to say to people, we're going to give you these incentives to build solar energy, but we know that there are low-income people that maybe have homes but don't have cash. Over the last 6 years, at least, the California budget has made the investments on different programs so that we can actually see some
Muchas gracias, Gilén.
results.
Ahora entonces voy con Luca.
Like my friend
La segunda
says.
pregunta sería, ¿qué impacto positivo esperan proceso a la región al avanzar en mayores métricas?
I'll point to some things in this year's budget that speaks to it. We have, $900 million for solar energy behind the meter installations, and 70% of that is for low-income folks. So that people that own homes but can't make those improvements. You have obviously the $7.9 billion that's in for clean energy. That's we're a wealthy nation state, so it's important that we direct some of these monies for getting some bang out of our bucks. But we really need a strong Public Utilities Commission to bring to land the final amount of clean energy implementation.
What is the question? But I agree with that. Apologies for being late. Is there a question you'd like me to answer? Thank you. Well, I'll try not to repeat what my friends and colleagues have said, but California is only 1% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, but we've always viewed ourselves as a leader in setting policies for the rest of the world. And we've tried to have policies that are based on science. We've been looking at the science of climate change for over 25 years. We're one of the only states that has our own climate assessment to look at the impacts of climate change, and our goals have been based on data and science.
Gracias, Luca. Y finalmente, entonces, para José Miguel, ¿qué importancia tiene para Corfo pensando en el futuro de la promoción de la economía circular en Chile?
We've wanted our policies to be ambitious, to drive technology, to enhance, not hinder, economic growth, to be affordable, and to be easy to replicate and understand so that other jurisdictions can follow what we've done. And we want to be able to export our policies. I don't know if we're at the point where we can talk about some of our successes, but we have been very successful in exporting our leading policies on clean cars and zero emission vehicles, on renewable energy and clean energy standards, on environmental justice and incorporating equity into our climate programs. And we've also been very successful in leveraging, and we want to continue to be successful in leveraging what we do with other partners, provinces, cities, states, subnational jurisdictions around the world to drive greater and more ambition for moving forward on climate.
Thank you for the answers to that great opening sort of place to start. But I want to dig in now to what does it mean to do a clean energy transition in a place like California? So the first thing is we heard in the video experts at Clean Air Task Force and the Environmental Defense Fund really looked at the need to build significant amounts of transmission, generation, and really accelerate the pace of building in California to achieve this in the coming decades. So from your perspectives, how can California continue to play that leadership role and meet those ambitious climate targets with those new challenges of the pace of building and adding this clean energy? So we can start over on this side again if you'd like.
Well, I should say that this year we probably had the best year in the legislature on climate than we've had in a while. And a lot of it was goals. A lot of it was, as discussed, dealing with equity issues. We had a climate working group in the Senate that was 12 senators because we had a bad year
Entonces,
a
creo
year
que
ago
con
where
esta
we didn't
pregunta
have
cerramos el
much
panel de
in
discusión.
policy.
Antes,
And
también yo
this year
quisiera dar unas tres
we
reflexiones
landed
de
11
lo que
bills
se ha
on the
discutido y se ha
governor's
presentado en la
desk, did the
mañana de hoy en
budget that was discussed.
y
The
justo la
governor
primera tiene que ver con lo que
came
tú
in with
mencionabas al
different
final.
bills.
Yo
We
creo que
did
las
it all.
métricas
But to your
importantes
question,
justo para poder darnos
the thing
cuenta
about it is
si
we've
estamos
done everything
avanzando
we
o
need
no
on the
en
policy,
circularidad.
and
Pero,
now it is
por ejemplo, ya hoy nos han
building the
puesto de relieve
transmission
Matthew y
and doing
Anjati
things
sobre
underneath it.
el desafío
And
que
we've
tenemos de tener que
prioritized
doblar el
offshore
nivel de
wind,
circularidad a nivel
and
global
we have
para
the
poder
transmission in
acercarnos
the
a los
Central
objetivos del
Coast
Acuerdo
for
de
that
París.
one,
¿Qué tanto
due to
estemos
Diablo,
avanzando si
the
no
former
contamos con
fossil
métricas? Pues
fuel
no lo
plant in
vamos a
Morro
saber.
Bay. But we
Lo
don't have
segundo
the
es que las
transmission
métricas
in
también
Humboldt,
en economía circular
off of
juegan
there.
un
And so
papel,
in order
digamos, muy
to
relevante en el
develop
análisis
that wind
financiero de los nuevos
and to be able
proyectos,
to
de los nuevos
utilize
programas,
it in the
iniciativas
time
que estén
that it takes
interesadas
to
en
build the
financiarse
wind,
en el
we have
sector
to have the
financiero.
transmission there, and that's a big challenge. And as we decentralize in solar and other things across the state,
Y finalmente también para el sector privado poder contar con esas métricas a nivel de unidad productiva les puede generar una información muy relevante y que además tiene repercusiones en cuanto a la competitividad que puede presentar para sus propios negocios el avance en ese nivel de electricidad. Pero si no lo medimos,
and we'll need the transmission to make sure we access it. So it is turning to needing to have the adequate plan and development to do everything that we've incented or provided for in the budget.
Thanks, John. And I want to applaud John. And as you may have heard, we voted to extend the use of Diablo Canyon, the last remaining nuclear fission plant in California. And John was, a number of us had concerns about that. We have constituents who have concerns about nuclear fission. But at the same time, we knew that we didn't have the resiliency with our electricity production to be able to meet peak demands probably as soon as this year, but certainly within 5 years. John was able to negotiate an additional $1.1 billion in investment, primarily in our grid, in exchange for the votes of a number of us to get on this extension. Obviously, we need massive amounts of investment in our electricity transmission, and that's not just in the expansion of that, but we have a lot of hardening to do because of the wildfire risk we're constantly facing, and I know that's something Senator Weickowski has been leading on. And then an issue that has kind of come to my attention, and I think a number of our attention, is just that you need to upgrade a lot of the electricity transmission out there in older communities, poorer communities, who can't have even like a level 2 charger. We can't talk about electric cars or zero-emission cars for everyone if their local street grids, if their house grids are not able to support that charging. So We're talking about significant expansions. I will say the federal government's budgets that they've passed recently are going to help us a lot. So we've been told we should expect $54 billion to come out of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. And I think 80% of that is supposed to come to transportation, which, as I understand it, a significant proportion of that can go to things like charging stations, grid upgrades, and the like.
Let me just disagree with my colleague. We didn't have a bad year for climate last year or the year before. We've had very big investments, $15 billion that we put in. So we've been doing things. We just haven't had those, what the governor likes is these top of the fold newspaper, announcements on what we're doing. We continue to move in the right direction. I think in responding to the video, it is a big problem with siting and permitting these clean energy projects. I mean, we have, you could build anything, and it takes a long time to get through the permitting process. Of course, there's going to be a boatload of commercial solar that we're going to do. We're going to do a boatload of storage. We have been doing it. I think one of the areas when we diversify the grid are some of these other smaller projects, these microgrids that people put in. I mean, we have, in my opinion, I'm the budget sub-chair, we haven't done enough on methane reduction. Yeah, we got a satellite for $100 million, but we have a lot of landfills, a lot of sewage treatment plants, and a lot of dairies that are putting out methane that are another source of a biofuel. I mean, I know a lot of people on zero emissions or zero carbon may not like that, but that's an externality that we have that can be converted to a clean energy source and also serve this a local area, putting less strain on the grid because you're not trying to ship it from Wyoming into California. You're just trying to ship it in the local area. So those opportunities that come on, I was with Senator Laird and I were in Canada, and they're looking at geothermal wells, but they're using old oil wells, and they're injecting water into creating steam. It's got to get to minus 179, but it's serving, for $1 million, it's serving a local area, and those are opportunities that we didn't think about 5 years ago. That would be part of the diversified portfolio that with the leadership of the California PUC can make a reality.
Thank you, Senator Weickowski, for emphasizing that point. It's very important. I'm going to go high level for a couple of minutes, a couple of points, and then go more specifically. There's no question that we face an unprecedented challenge in the amount of clean energy that we have to bring online. We basically have to increase the size of our grid by 3 to 4-fold between now and the next 2 decades to get to our clean electricity targets. And that will require that we develop at an unprecedented pace every year. The highest year the fastest we brought things online was 2012. We've only been there 1 year. We're going to basically have to do that every year from now on for the next 20 plus years. Now to get there, it's critical that we have resources. So the actions that the legislature took this year are absolutely essential to helping us get there. We also need sophisticated agencies, and fortunately we do have very sophisticated energy and clean air agencies in California. I will say don't sell California short, because in the 2009, 10, 11, 12 period, when we had funds available through the federal stimulus bill with tax credits that expired unless development happened very quickly, a lot of people said it's too hard to get projects approved through California. There's too much permitting delay and difficulty, and we were able to outsmart and convince the skeptics that it could be done. We did it. We delivered 12,000 megawatts of installed capacity. So we're capable of doing that. Now, what is being done at my agency, the California Public Utilities Commission, which regulates the private utilities in the state? We've had a series of procurement orders that are increasingly aggressive, and we've told the utilities to procure more quickly. the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, which is an umbrella agency that promotes economic development in California, has a task force of several people that is designed to break through bottlenecks in permitting. That is their sole job. The legislature also passed legislation this year that allows for an expedited 9-month permitting process at the California Energy Commission for clean energy projects that opt into a statewide process. So that will hopefully reduce delays in permitting on that end. We also have a transmission planning process in California where an independent grid operator approves the necessary transmission for all the clean energy development that has to occur. My agency has been sending over to that grid operator plans that show how much resources we'll need to get to our clean energy goals, and we've sent over increasingly higher and higher amounts of transmission for them to study, and then when they put it in their plan, that allows for transmission developers to go out and build it and get recovery from customers, from ratepayers. The legislature also provided some money this year to accelerate and reduce the cost of transmission that will allow resources like our geothermal resources in parts of California that take a long time to develop to come online more quickly. We're also looking at how we can leverage the new federal programs that were just mentioned. And more generally, at a national level, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is looking at reforms to make the transmission process happen more quickly and more efficiently, and we in California are supporting those efforts. For example, there's a long backlog in how quickly generation projects can interconnect to the grid. So there are reforms that both our grid operator and at the federal level are pursuing to make that process happen more quickly. So there's a lot of focus on implementation. It's very challenging, but it's definitely doable.
Thank you. I want to actually stay with you, Commissioner, for this next question, because you mentioned, we think a lot at Clean Air Task Force about not just what it's going to take to decarbonize, but what it will mean to do that affordably. And in the case of the grid, in the case of transmission, also what it means to provide reliability. So I'd love to hear from you about how you think about, in the context of decarbonization and the changes that are coming for California's grid in the next couple of decades, how does that happen in an affordable and a reliable way?
It's a very big challenge because we know to get to our long-term climate goals, we need to electrify everything we can. So we need to electrify all transportation that we can. We need to electrify our building sector. So in addition to just making the grid cleaner, we need to grow the grid. At the same time in California, we are facing in real time the impacts of climate change much more rapidly than we ever thought. So Senator Laird mentioned the legislation that provides the option of extending our nuclear power plant to provide baseload power over the next several years while we make the transition to cleaner energy. We've had drought that reduces our hydropower. We've had wildfires on our transmission lines. We have growing demand because of unprecedented heat waves. We've had heat waves that affect the entire region, so our ability to import energy is affected. We've had heat waves that affect the performance of our thermal power plant. So we have tremendous challenges, and we can't allow our grid to suffer. We can't allow outages to happen as we're making this transition because we are a leading state. We have to show that the transition to renewable energy can happen reliably. So it's a very, very big challenge. In 5 or 10 years, I don't know what's in the, I did read the Clean Air Act Task Force EDF report. I don't know if this was in the video. I think in 5 or 10 years, we'll have a lot of new technologies that will complement the intermittent renewable energy resources that we're increasingly relying on. all types of long duration storage. But in the meantime, we have to address problems of reliability. And in particular, the challenge in California and other places is when our solar resources go down and stop producing, and everyone comes home and turns on their air conditioner and the load goes up, we need to make sure that there are resources available in that period of time when the demands on the grid are the greatest. But we need to keep rates affordable, or else people won't want to electrify, or they won't be able to electrify. There's a lot of ways to make this happen potentially. Some money for electrification can and should come from this general budget, and the legislature has done that over the past couple of years, allocating more money from the general fund as opposed to ratepayers. We need to reduce the costs of our transmission system and inject more competition in who owns transmission lines, and that's a reform that we pursued in California and that we're pushing for federally. I personally think we need to look at expanding the grid to include regional cooperation from other states in the West, because that allows for a more diverse load that can complement our load at lower costs. But here's one thing I think we really need to keep in mind. There's fascinating research about the extent of the learning curve and how it applies in the renewable energy context. Over the past 100 years, in real terms, the price of fossil fuel resources has not gone down. It stayed static. Whereas the learning curve for wind, solar, batteries, and electrolyzers that can convert renewable energy into hydrogen continues to grow very rapidly. So not only will moving to clean energy be cheaper than we thought, it will be cheaper than business as usual. And beyond that, the higher we go, the more we produce, the faster we progress on the learning curve, the cheaper things are. So we need to do more faster. We need to accelerate in order for things to be cheaper. And that'll help keep things affordable.
You know, Cliff's right. We actually have to do things smarter. And I always want to try to be smarter when I'm at panels like this. But some of it is like on offshore wind. We have Diablo Canyon, San Luis Obispo, and we have Eureka. We have no transmission lines in Eureka. I mean, zero. But we have transmission lines in where the nuclear facility is. So just on the natural, you would say first thing probably favors San Luis Obispo. But the consumers are much smarter. I mean, back in the day, you buy your electric vehicle, and you had overnight you would charge it all night because that was the idea. And now now we're learning that in order to help out the reliability, you should actually be charging it during the day when we have excessive solar energy. And we're learning that air conditioning unit, we can have a smart home and turn on the air conditioning unit at 3 o'clock when we still have solar resources, so our house goes from 110 to 90, so it's livable when we get there. But all the technology that's available to us, and the average consumer is becoming much smarter and much more understanding of how the role that they're going to play in getting it. And it's not just going to be the three big IOUs that are going to save the day with us on our energy decisions. And I think, you know, the holy grail here is these new technologies that we actually don't think about, that we don't know that California is anxious and ambitious about that. You know, the area, I'm from the Bay Area, and there are a gazillion firms that are looking at these answers on how they can make, you know, electric trains that charge in the station. So you're not charging overnight. You're trying to deal with that. You plug in, come into the station, and you charge at the station, and you move on. I would never even heard of that 3 years ago. So I think there's education element that is going to be critical to the plan.
It's great to follow Cliff and Bob on this, because if you look at my Senate district, a little bit of Silicon Valley, but really the Central Coast, Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Luis Obispo, it is a microcosm of all these issues coming into conflict in one way or another. The Santa Cruz Mountains, PG&E hasn't been able to maintain electric power during the last year. There have been something like 10 outages multiple days. And I have constituents say, really? You want us to decarbonize? You want us to move to electricity? We can't charge our cars. We can't get water. We had a fire that destroyed 925 houses. We're not going to be able to get
Hi,
out
this is
in
what
our,
this
in
is
our
work.
cars, and we have
A
to
little?
determine how the grid
Okay.
is reliable as
Hello.
electrified
Okay,
to do
right.
that.
So
At the
okay.
same time, we have the largest battery storage in a
Outlining
former
what
fossil fuel
Nepal-
plant in Moss Landing, and we have an even
You've
larger
put in place some of these
battery
policies that are
storage for the
taking forward
former fossil fuel plant
six
in
with,
Morro Bay, where there's transmission.
and we
lines.
applaud you for that. So
And I think one of the untold stories of our 10 hot days in September.
maybe you
is
could give us
battery
some
storage
perspectives
for a
from
period of hours
the
is
Green Growth Institute. I know you've been
1.5
working
times
together with
the
Sweden and
electricity onto
with
the
many
grid
of the
that was coming from
host
Diablo
countries
Canyon,
here.
and that
So maybe you
got
could give us
through
some of
the
your
toughest
perspectives.
times in a way that the grid didn't go down. And there's a perfect transition from fossil fuel to renewables in a way that helps with our reliability on the grid. And then if you look at Diablo Canyon, and one of the interesting things there is in concert, as Dave said, in crafting that deal, I referred to the need for a Marshall Plan of renewable energy in California, and the money is the first. The funny thing is the San Luis Obispo paper always would do parentheses and explain the Marshall Plan reference, because apparently only a few of us that are older understand it. And so I would always laugh every time I saw it explained over and over again what it was. And it is really what we have to do. And the governor's office at different times in that wanted a 10-year extension of Diablo Canyon, but the offshore wind in that region, if everything went perfectly, would come on 4 years into the extension, more likely 5. And I think one of the reasons we got 5 years on the extension was to get Diablo out of the way for the offshore wind and have the transmission ready to use in that. And so we have all these challenges. And the other piece is how is it affordable? And in our climate package coming out of the Senate, we created a climate trust, and we want to reduce rates for at least lower middle income people, because in California we've loaded most of the costs of our climate programs onto electricity rates. And unless we do something over time with the electricity rates, we're also pricing some people out of the entire game. So that's why I say it's things working against each other. It's the reliability, it's the affordability, but it's the need, as Cliff said, to do it at such a rapid clip. It's like, how do we do all these things in concert as we move ahead? We're committed to doing it. And I should clarify that I thought we had a bad year last year on policy, not on budget, which, since I'm sitting next to the budget sub-chair, we did an outstanding job on that, you know. So, but we caught up this year. I think we really caught up.
Thanks, John. It's I don't know that I have that much to add after these three, but I guess I'd say at a high level, the answer is pretty simple. If we want to meet our climate goals while having a grid reliability, it's more renewables, more transmission, and more storage, right? We all know that, but obviously that's very challenging for us to try to achieve. And I just want to pick up on the comments that Senator Weickowski made, which is I think we do need a lot more innovation, and I think could do more in the state to try to spur that on. Now we rely a lot on mandates. In my short time in the Senate, we've passed more mandates, but I also think we could do more, and I know CPUC and others are doing this. I think the legislature could do more on providing incentives, whether these are in the form of additional tax credits, more public-private type partnerships, but we should be intentionally spurring through economic policy, more innovation, because we know storage right now is a real bottleneck. We can provide funding for transmission upgrades and expansion, but on that innovation side, we don't know what's coming. And I'll take a slight issue with what our esteemed commissioner said. I'm not 100% sure that we want to electrify everything. We may want to do that, but I'm not sure what innovation might hold. And when we talk about, for example, medium and heavy duty, maybe hydrogen's the way to go. Maybe it's electrification. What's that? Keep going. Yeah. So I think we need to sort of take a diverse approach. We need to be more intentional about trying to bring private capital to bear on these problems. And I think that's something. Again, I've been in the Senate for less than 2 years, but my observation is that we are not intentional enough about trying to bring private capital to bear, at least out of the legislature, and I think that's something we've done. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention something that I was able to do with one of my budget requests, which is we got $5 million for something called the Sustainability Decathlon, which will be held in Costa Mesa at the fairgrounds in Orange County next year. And what it is it's going to be a competition bringing together teams of engineers from around the world to design and build a solar, all-electric, zero-emissions home. And we're hoping that will not only be a tourism draw for my district, but also a way to spur scalable innovations. And I think we need to do a lot more things like that, because ultimately it's not just about exporting policies to the rest of the world, but I think we also want to create innovations. And California has always been a leader, obviously, in innovation. I think it's about time that we continue with that green innovation, and I think that's really how we'll change the world. It's not going to be about getting to zero emissions ourselves in our state. It's going to be about creating not just the policies, but the technologies that are exportable to the rest of the world.
Thank you. I'm going to let the commissioner respond.
Well, no, I'm actually going to agree with Senator Min, even though it's more interesting to have a fight on the stage. On hydrogen, I think we need to electrify whatever we can, but there are a lot of hard to electrify sectors, including medium and heavy duty fleets, aviation, shipping, steel, chemical industries that we'll need renewable hydrogen for. And while you were flying in the air, the PUC under my leadership just released 2 hydrogen decisions for public comment, so now you have great airplane reading. By the way, congratulations on that solar decathlon. That proponent has been after that for years and years, and Governor Brown, who I work for, broke his heart and never approved it. I just want to say one piece on the technology. I completely agree with everything that's been said up here and the need for innovation. And one example of this, and we don't know what's going to come, but we do know that there's going to be innovation. For those of you who weren't following minute to minute, in September, California came very close to having rolling outages because of an intense heat wave that led to demand that was 15% above above the average, way beyond what we expected. And one thing that saved the day at the very end is that Governor Newsom activated an emergency alert system that went to 27 million people, the kind of thing when children are kidnapped and it buzzes on your phone, and the result was a dramatic drop in demand on the part of customers. Now that has to be reserved for true emergencies, but there's surely technology that will allow us in the next few years to have things like that done automatically, so that people's load on their refrigerators or other smart appliances or their air conditioners is shaved off just a little bit through an app where you don't even think about it, you don't even know about it, and that can effectuate some very significant drops in demand that can help with our overall reliability situation.
Thank you. I'm going to come actually right back to you, Senator Min, because I want to get into, in the Growing the Grid report, Clean Air Task Force and Environmental Defense Fund recommend consideration of a comprehensive clean energy deployment plan. And a lot like the Marshall Plan, it sounds like that you raised, Senator Laird. So there's discussion in California of what that type of planning might mean. But I want to get to the level of, for your district and for each of the areas that you all in the legislature represent, what would clean energy planning in a comprehensive way in California mean for your district, for your constituents, for the projects like what you mentioned and the sustainability decathlon? Tell us more about that.
Thank you. And while I love the Marshall Plan, I've always thought of this as an Apollo project type deal, which is we talked about getting a person on the moon within 10 years, and I think we got someone there in 7 years. And it's that type of national mobilization that I think we need to see. For my district, I represent a wealthier coastal community. So cities like Newport Beach, Irvine, Laguna Beach. If you ever watch The Hills or The Real Housewives of OC, that's my district. So we don't have a lot of the same environmental justice issues that others have, but I think that's important for us to emphasize. What I am hopeful for, when I think about my district and how decarbonization and a transition to clean energy is going to affect it, one, I'm hopeful that what we'll see is cities continue to lead. And you wouldn't think this about Orange County because it's always been known as a conservative area. Ronald Reagan once described my district as the place where good Republicans go to die. And it's
they did.
yes, and that's great. He said they did die, and that's why it's now Democratic. I think we're supposed to be nonpartisan here, but you know, we have actually seen a lot of leadership out of our cities. Many of our cities, even those led by Republicans, not ones that you would think would be on the leadership of climate change and transition, have been. What I would like to see us do is expand our storage, and that's something that when I saw the first major storage project in my district for the first time, I was just shocked by the sheer scale of the batteries that are required for storage, and that's going to be, I think, a major hurdle for us. And then I would love to see my part of Orange County also become a leader in innovation. I grew up in Silicon Valley in the 1980s. I saw the transition to becoming the leading tech hub of the world. And I think that my part of Orange County has a lot of the requisite elements. You know, we've got venture capital, we've got top grade STEM research at UC Irvine. We've got an incredible place to live. But I think California, whether it's in Orange County, Silicon Valley, or elsewhere, needs to be at the forefront of green innovation, and so I think that's someplace that an area I'd like to try to emphasize.
I think I'm going to answer your question slightly differently because I spoke to my district, but I just chaired a Senate working group on climate with 12 senators. That is one of the reasons we passed every tough climate bill this year off the Senate floor. And it was 12 senators where there was a political divide, an ethnic divide, a geographic divide. And we had to take your question of what every individual need was for a district and wrap it into one program where you really addressed it. And so equity was at the center because we had certain urban districts where there's electricity deserts for renewables. There's multifamily units where there's electricity deserts for recharging. There were rural areas that were paying high electricity fees, but not realizing some of the things that were necessary. And you go through all these issues, and one of the things we had to do is try to harmonize them for an overall policy, and that's why we had a high road labor agreement, tried to lower electricity rates, tried to deal with some of the ease with which you had to site transmission, tried to deal with electric vehicles and how they might be more affordable in certain instances and how people might actually have access to electricity for them. Try to deal with methane because California had been really limited in what we were doing on well capping and try to expand that and make sure there was revenue due to Senator Weickowski. Add a lot of money for the organics implementation to get that methane over time out. And so it was really trying to take, if you had all 40 senators here and they all answered like Senator Min just did or I did earlier, it's like, how do you harmonize that into one program where you're fundamentally making a difference and fundamentally dealing with our goals? And that's what we tried to do this year.
So I have a East Bay, San Francisco Bay Area. I represent the part of San Jose where no people live, but all the tech guys are in there. So, you know, Bloom Energy just opened up a new production facility in Fremont. Tesla is, the manufacturing plant is there. So I think the businesses who are pretty well-to-do are going to be really taking advantage of, you know, making sure that they have their own backup system. They'll have these Bloom boxes in there, so when the grid becomes in a panic situation, they're going to take care of themselves. And more people will buy, you know, electric cars, and we have charging stations, and all that in my district will probably be a happy place. The challenge that we'll have is decarbonizing our buildings. You know, for years, we've had policies that have had the incentives for apartment owners to decarbonize their buildings, and we got nada. I mean, there's a couple of people, but a lot of our apartments in the area and throughout the state were built in the 50s and 60s. They've got no insulation. They've got 60-year-old windows in there. Just the basic things that the money that we put on the table has not been enough, because they just say they pass it on to the renter. So that problem needs to be solved. I don't know, we've tried different ways, tried shame, tried economic incentives, but that decarbonizing the building is something that yes, the rich folk will build the zero net energy. We've got the platinum buildings. That's easy. I'm really concerned about, as like the University of California has a zero energy portfolio. But what they do is they simply ditch some building that's got bad carbon footprint and get it in rent at some new place. And I was one of the folks when we were having the climate discussions is that no, we're the state. We're not ditching anything. We got to fix it. And if we can't get to zero, then we get to near zero. And we accept the DMV building as she is. So that's that. The other thing is the people who can't afford it, the low income folks. I mean, I know that Cliff and Mary were around when we were doing cap and trade extension, and my bill that didn't go anywhere was to take a climate dividend and give it to everybody. The idea of taking a climate dividend and giving it to the most needy, so that they can respond to the rising cost of having a carbon-free society, is something that probably should be looked at again.
Yeah, this has been an incredible discussion this morning. I want to ask one final question in closing as we reach the end of the session, and I'll go to you first, Commissioner. But, as we look ahead on decarbonization, what's next for policy and decision makers in California?
Well, Senator Weickowski talked about one thing where we need to move really rapidly on transportation electrification. We now have mandates for light-duty vehicles and heavy-duty vehicles and buses. We need to build the infrastructure to support those zero-emission vehicles, and it's going to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of charging stations. So we need to be able to fund those, and we need to be able to provide infrastructure in underserved communities where right now there are very few electric vehicles. So that's an enormous challenge. The pace at which we need to develop those charging stations is also formidable. At some point very soon in the next few years, the market's going to turn and zero-emission vehicles will be as cheap, if not cheaper, than internal combustion cars, and stations will come. But we need to get over that hump in the next few years. Senator Weickowski mentioned the building sector. In California, about 2/3, if not more, of our homes rely on gas appliances, and we need to electrify those buildings where we can. And we have 12 million existing buildings in the state. There's a lot of appliances that need to turn over, and turn over quickly. We need to reduce emissions from our natural and working lands, and the state over the past year or two, especially this year, both through legislation and otherwise, has really said we're going to target the various landscapes and make sure we have a strategy for ensuring that they are sinks rather than sources of emissions. And then we need to, and we are, this last point is, we are still an oil-producing state. As we transition to decarbonization, how do we have a just transition for those communities that have traditionally relied on oil production for their livelihoods? It's very difficult and controversial, but the state is leaning into that and starting those very difficult conversations.
And I think we should have more difficult conversations. We have to make friends with the bad guys. We have, the first 2 days of this conference was centered on financing. how are we going to get the money? I mean, if anybody has money right now, it's the fossil fuel industry. I mean, the last quarter has been tremendous profits that they have. And instead of, a lot of times we're on these panels and it's the bad guy. You're the bad guy. I want to eliminate you. I'm going to put a wooden spike in your heart. Instead of trying to figure out ways where are the opportunities that we take their capital and they become carbon managers. They make the investments. I mean, the biggest solar energy facility in California is in one of the oil fields down in Kern County. I mean, so there's I don't know how it happens. I don't know how you do it, but there's money there that you would like to have them invest into the grid. They're energy companies. They're still oil companies, but there's if I could figure that out and provide some leadership on how we would do that, because that's what we're grappling for. We got public financing, okay, la-di-da, but we need that private capital, and we got venture capitalists that are going to come on the natural, but it's that second wave or that other wave that we really need it because of, as you've pointed out, 4 times the growth that we're going to have in renewable portfolio. So that would be a key for me.
In our climate working group, there was one senator that always had the refrain of, I'm tired of all the goals, let's actually do something. In this year, we did more goals, but we all, so as simple as it is, the next step is totally about implementation. It is really about expanding the grid, dealing with equity, expanding more renewables, and doing everything that we can to actually do that. And I think that will be a lot of us are coming back after a very successful legislative year last year to look at what pieces we have to do to make sure that we kickstart that into this year. And we're going to have a more challenging budget, and we're going to have to figure out, as Senator Weickowski just said, how to leverage all the different partners and all the different capital and everybody in doing it. But we know that that is our task in coming back to Sacramento in the next session.
Thank you. I guess I'd say, looking at this from the big picture, we're not going to meet our climate goals, I think, unless we can get the costs of renewable energy down below the cost of fossil fuel. We can't ban fossil fuels. People will continue to use it. We'll have pressure as elected officials. 3 of us up here have to get reelected every 2 to 4 years. And that means we can't ask our constituents to pay a lot more for renewables than they're paying right now. So I think that's a challenge, and that's going to be a number of different policy levers. I think that's one major challenge we're facing, and I know the CPUC is working a lot of stuff there. I'm kind of optimistic about our state's ability to meet our goals on transportation and on utilities. But I think the next challenges we're going to face are some of those other sectors like cement, asphalt, maritime, aviation, and all the other things that make our economy go that we're not quite as focused on. And I will just say one of the reasons I'm here is to kind of learn more about what ideas are out there. One of the great things about our job in the California legislature is that with supermajorities of one party that is more climate focused, we are able to pass a lot of different cool ideas, and even in challenging budget situations, and it's very entrepreneurial, and we don't face a lot of gridlock. So any good ideas that we're able to come out of from this session, from this convention, are ones that we potentially can act on.
Well, thank you to each of you for spending some time with us this morning. Thank you to our audience. I'd like to give a round of applause for all our speakers today. Thank you again for being here. Really looking forward to continuing these discussions for the rest of the conference and with us at Clean Air Task Force. So again, thank you, and we'll be back with more programming shortly here at the Zero Carbon Future Pavilion.